Ahoy hoy! Welcome to round 5 here from Grand Prix Liverpool. It is Tim Willoughby alongside Frank Carsten, bringing you all the details from our feature match area and a whole host of talent in our feature match area. On one side of things, we have Piotr Gagowski, flanked by a couple of members of Team Axion now, that being Niels Moller and Joao Chosa. They are up against, well, it's one half of the Danish team, that being Andreas Petersen, Christopher Larsen, Martin Dang. The format is modern, unified, constructed, and we're going to get to kick things off here with Joao against Martin. It's Dredge for Chosa here, and he is going to be starting off with Shriekhorn, which gives him a good way of getting a whole bunch of cards into his graveyard very quickly indeed.
Yep, great start on turn 1. You obviously hope to mill a card with the actual mechanic Dredge into the graveyard, either now or in your next upkeep. But yeah, Dredge, it's all about the graveyard. I mean, it's the mechanic even gives the deck the name, and it has just a bunch of Shriekhorns as well as discard and card draw effects, along with a group of creatures, specifically Prized Amalgam, Bloodghast and Narcomoeba, that can return to the battlefield from the graveyard without having to invest any mana. It gains quite a bit from Guilds of Ravnica and Creeping Chill, which will drain the opponent for 3 life when it is put into the graveyard.
Shriekhorn puts another Shriekhorn into the graveyard. There are them that would suggest that that's exactly where Shriekhorn deserves to be, but it's not one of the more impactful things that one can mill there. 2 of them going to the graveyard, no dredges off the first 4 cards that Shriekhorn has milled. So in that regard, a little bit of a reprieve for Martin Dang in the early stages of this game.
Yeah, somewhat of a disappointing hit for Choka. You hope to mill over, I don't know, a Stinkweed Imp along with some of these creatures that I mentioned, and then pass on turn 2 with, I don't know, let's say 5 power on the battlefield. But yeah, not much luck for him yet.
Cathartic Reunion, discarding a Narcomoeba. You do want Narcomoeba heading to your graveyard, but ideally from your deck rather than your hand. But now the Dredge engine very much going, and we see our first chill happening there. That means completely for free, you get to drain your opponent for 3. Another one coming along, and this really does give a proper sort of turbo start to these Dredge decks.
Yeah, Cathartic Reunion is such a good card for the Dredge deck because it's discard then draw. So by discarding Stinkweed Imp, you can then set up the Dredge mechanic by the first card draws. And, well, we get some power onto the battlefield, as well as some drains with the Creeping Chill. This card hasn't really changed the archetype completely, not like the general way it plays, but it does add the potential of draining the opponent for 12 over the course of the game if you mill your entire library and hit all 4 Creeping Chills. Makes it also easier to turn on Bloodghasts, shortens the clock, and well, this was close to the turn 2 that Choka was hoping for. Meanwhile, it seemed like Dang is passing without a second land. That is not great for the Dane.
Yeah, this could be a very, very quick game 1 indeed here. Though must be noted that Christopher Larsen has already picked up his game 1 win against Piotr Gagowski. Crackline Ironworks just not getting anything done. And Hardened Scales, when it has a fast draw, it can be a very fast draw indeed. So, swings coming in here. That Prized Amalgam alongside Narcomoeba dealing 4 points of damage to Christopher Larsen. To Martin Dang here. Dakmore Salvage getting played, but that does get back a couple of copies of Bloodghast that do now have haste. Not that it's too much use after combat. Another Prized Amalgam comes along, and for the Danish player, well, he's in check. He has to deal with all of these threats on this other side of the battlefield, and he just can't. Has to scoot them up. We are less than 4 minutes into the round, and we already have 2 games completed. This is night and day from last round.
Well, I mean, this is a modern tournament. Were you expecting fair? Then I think you picked the wrong format. Heck, the wrong species.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to work out that when it comes to picking a modern deck, if you're picking a deck that feels like it's doing everything comparatively fairly, it's almost like you're putting yourself at a small handicap against the field. Here we get a chance to see the one other matchup that's going on for the game in terms of game ones. Niels Moller, former English national champion, up against Andreas Petersen from Denmark on Titan Shift. And there's already 2 Valakuts in play alongside 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mountains. Even though a Field of Ruin getting rid of one of these copies of Valakut, right now Andreas Petersen has the potential to pick up his game win in game 1 very quickly.
Yeah, this looks pretty good. Let me even reset the advantage bar all the way over to Petersen's side. I mean, one player has 4 lands, the other player has more than double, and when that player is also the one controlling Valakut, yeah, you only need 3 more mountains now to win the game for Petersen, which is not going to be all that difficult to do, given that pretty much every card in his deck is either a land, or some green spell that searches for lands, or let's say a Primeval Titan that also allows you to search for lands from your library. So yeah, 3 more mountains is all it will take.
Summoner's Pact. Well, this is a way of searching for a Primeval Titan that searches for still more lands, or indeed it could search for a Valakut and a mountain, which might be even better here.
True. Well, if that Titan resolves.
Going for a Wood Elves. Okay.
Wow, interesting. Well, perhaps Petersen expects Moller to have some kind of counter magic, and well, when you do expect that, then you might as well have him counter a less threatening card.
Plays a Valakut before using the Wood Elves. They can search for a forest and put it onto the battlefield, but of course Stomping Ground, in addition to being a forest, is a mountain, so that's 2 Valakut triggers, 6 damage straight to the dome of Niels Moller. Goes down to just 3 points of life here. Sweltering Sun cycled there. Finds a Search for Tomorrow, and Search for Tomorrow ought to do it. Is he going to play it here, or is he going to play it a little bit safe, at least for now?
Well, if you still expect that Moller is holding some kind of counter magic, you might as well pass the turn so as to not give Moller the opportunity of using that counter magic to counter something of relevance, and then go for the win on the next turn.
And depending on what the counter magic is, if it was the likes of a Mana Leak, then it will be good next turn in a way that it simply isn't right now.
Yeah. I think Moller was about to like Field of Ruin onto the Valakut. Petersen said, yeah, that's probably not going to be good for you, because it would allow Petersen to just search a mountain from his deck, which is immediately lethal.
So Timely Reinforcements for full value here, generating a whole bunch of tokens and life for Niels Moller. This could be something. Not convinced it's going to be enough, but, you know, step in the right direction.
Facing 2 Valakuts, it's still hard to get out of this. At least Petersen remembers to pay the upkeep on the Summoner's Pact. That would have been one easy but awkward way for Moller to win this game.
Yeah, I've seen players do all sorts of different things to make sure that they remember it. You are allowed to put like a little bead or a counter on top of your deck. I have seen people that have just kind of reached under the bead to draw their card because they've somehow managed to forget what it signifies. The favourite thing I've ever seen someone do to remember about Summoner's Pact, you know the kind of the hamster balls that you get, that you know, put a hamster in, it can like roll around. They took half of that and put it completely over their deck, so they literally couldn't get at their deck in any direction.
That is brilliant.
In order to make sure that when it came to paying for pacts, they had as much of a reminder as possible.
So I think Moller's life total hadn't been updated yet. It was actually at 9 briefly from the Timely Reinforcements, but with 2 Valakuts on the battlefield, 2 mountains, it is all it takes for Petersen to take down the first game.
All right, so we're about 8.5 minutes into the round. We've already had a game 1 in each of our 3 matches. Now we're going to get a chance to see whether or not Martin Dang can return the favour a little bit. He got his first land all right, just fine, last game. Whether or not he can do better than that in game 2 is going to be pivotal in him getting back in this match. I see that he has Rest in Peace in his deck after sideboarding, so that, if nothing else, is something of an improvement. Yeah,
well, that is to be expected, and Choka will also be ready for Rest in Peace. It's actually one of the reasons why many players favor the Banned Spirits deck nowadays over 5-color humans. Just the ability to play the powerful sideboard cards like Rest in Peace and Stony Silence into your mana base, because the Humans deck, which relied on cards like Cavern of Souls and Unclaimed Territory to fix its mana, wasn't able to realistically put those cards in their sideboard and cast them consistently. The Banned Spirits deck can, and that's a big advantage. Especially with graveyard-reliant decks and artifact-reliant decks running rampant in Modern nowadays.
So there's been a little bit of fetching and so on and so forth thus far, though in each case Martin Dang trying to limit the amount of damage that he takes from his lands, fetching a tapped Temple Garden and then just a basic island. And along comes Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, so that's going to mean that if Joao had a big plan of casting, I don't know, a Cathartic Reunion on turn 2 to get everything going, well, he's going to have to make a new plan.
Yep. Yeah, that card also came in from the sideboard. It's probably not as potent in this matchup as it is against, say, Ironworks or Storm combo decks. But yeah, it can still buy Dang some time. Maybe also make it more difficult to flash back Fateless Looting or the like. And all that can add up.
Yeah, kind of a tempo play. It's not going to win the game on its own, but it's going to slow down your opponents a little bit while applying a clock.
Well, here we have a relevant piece of interaction. Remorseful Cleric. It is a spirit, so Dang actually plays it in his main deck. Fits the tribe, but there you see it. Sacrifice Remorseful Cleric. Exile all cards from target player's graveyard, and that is gonna be a good piece of interaction against the whole dredge angle. Perhaps exiling a bunch of Bloodghasts, Narcomoebas, Prized Amalgams before they return, as well as taking out some dredgers in the process.
So a Lightning Axe being played at end of turn there to kill off Thalia, that meaning there's plenty more options available to Joao on his turn. He dredges Stinkweed Imp, which is the card he discarded to Lightning Axe. Nice interaction there. And it's just the Remorseful Cleric still in play for Martin Dang. Some sort of interesting irony about a spirit representing Tormod's Crypt.
Yeah, that is essentially what it is. Tormod's Crypt with power and toughness.
Creeping Chill there, reversing the life totals for us. It's now 18 to 15 in Joao's favor rather than Martin's.
The big question is, when are you going to sacrifice this Remorseful Cleric? Because Dang didn't want to sacrifice it just to exile one or now maybe two Stinkweed Imps. Because, I mean, that's decent, but it leaves Choka with the ability to set up new dredge angles afterwards. But at some point you do have to sacrifice it, otherwise you're never getting any advantage. Maybe now to prevent these Narcomoebas from coming back.
I mean, we've not seen any of the Prized Amalgams or Bloodghasts or similar thus far. In response to all those triggers, that's enough for Martin to get rid of the graveyard of Joao.
It's a decent trade, but it's not game over yet. Not in the way that something like Rest in Peace might be, but because now Choka can set up the same dredges on the next turn. It is a good piece of interaction, but it seems like it may mainly act as a temporary speed bump, because Choka is likely going to mill over a whole bunch of cards from his library on the next turn.
Well, I believe that Martin Dang actually has a copy of Rest in Peace in hand here, so
Ooh.
He's basically just bought himself a little bit of time before really dropping the hammer blow in terms of hate cards from the sideboard. And I think another card that he has, I saw while he was searching through his deck from his sideboard, is Worship, which is a card that could prove very problematic for Joao to be able to deal with here.
Yeah, Worship, especially when combined with hexproof creatures, like Guise of Saint Traft or Drogskull Captain, which also grants hexproof, can be quite difficult for the dredge deck to beat.
Well, it's another cleric coming in, so it feels like in this game too, essentially every single card in Martin Dang's deck is a card that's almost tailor-made to make this matchup difficult for dredge.
Yeah, that is what the big issue with dredge is. Game 1, you are pretty much favored against the entire field, because the deck is so powerful at doing what it does. But then, yeah, games 2 and 3, you are facing all these graveyard hate cards, and suddenly it is way more difficult to execute your game plan successfully.
Yeah, Drow, most decks, when they got a grip full of cards, feel pretty good about things, but unfortunately for Dredge, a lot of the time, it wants to be just getting those cards into the graveyard and treating its graveyard as a hand. And right now, if the graveyard's your hand, Drow doesn't have a hand.
Yep, that's a nice way to put it. Many cards in the Dredge deck are just better in the graveyard than in your hand. But you do need some discard effects to get them there. And even then, yeah, this Rest in Peace is going to prevent it all.
Well, back-to-back collected companies provided Martin Dang with a clock to go with all of that disruption, and that enough for Drow Chosa to pick up his cards. Those guys going to be going to a game 3. I don't think that was 2 wins, though it felt like if ever there was a game that you wanted to award multiple wins to a player for, it felt like Martin absolutely dominated that game.
Yeah, it seemed like he had some graveyard hate left over even after already winning with Rest in Peace on the battlefield. But then again, the Dredge decks typically board in some ways of removing Rest in Peace to at least fight back against the hate. So we may see an interesting game 3 still.
All right, so now we have Titan Shift in the hands of Andreas Petersen against Niels Muller's blue-white control. Everything in terms of action early doors on the Titan Shift player, which makes a little bit of sense. Often they have a little bit more action in these early turns. Tireless Tracker getting a lot of clues generated as we see the Titan Shift deck getting tons of extra lands in play. Already a Valakut in play, and indeed 4 mountains right now. Won't take too much work for there to be a few more. There's already a Search for Tomorrow on Suspend that will be fetching another basic land soon enough. And just like in game 1, this could be a big problem for Muller, as the Valakut will just naturally deal damage without needing to cast lots of spells from this point.
Yeah, what stands out to me from this board is typically you would expect that the white-blue control deck excels at drawing cards. But here, having already generated 5 clues with Tireless Tracker, it's actually the Titan Shift deck that is drawing way more cards than the opponent.
Drawing more cards, getting more lands into play, also getting to attack and things. It doesn't really feel like a fair and even balanced division of benefits here.
No, that Tireless Tracker seems to be the MVP of this particular game. It is the type of threat where if you are the control player, you need to deal with it right away. Just have a Path to Exile for it, or maybe some counter magic. If you don't, it is just gonna accumulate like a seemingly unsurmountable amount of card advantage over time.
These Wood Elves have been great for Andreas Petersen here. A card that in every format where it's been around, it's seen a little bit of play. It turns out that just a value creature that lets you search up a land and put it into play, very powerful indeed. Even if you're just building a commander deck, this is one of those cards to look out for as just being an efficient way of accelerating and also potentially fixing your mana, because the forest that you fetch does not need to be a basic forest.
Yeah, that is kind of a sweet interaction for this Valakut deck for sure. Now, I'm trying to rack my brain on how Molle can come back from this position. I have to imagine it starts with a removal spell for the Tireless Tracker, then maybe a Field of Ruin for the Valakut, and then hoping that Petersen doesn't really draw much of relevance with all of those clues. Still a tall order.
Yeah, a lot of things need to go right for Niels here. I mean, the other thing that you can, of course, hope for is that your teammates, Piotr Glowowski and Joao Chosa, both just win their matches. That's one way that you can do this very, very straightforwardly indeed, because both of those matches going to game 3s here. We are over 30 minutes left on the round, and we've already got 5 completed games. This has been an absolute roller coaster of a round thus far. More clues, more lands. Andreas Petersen firing on all cylinders here.
Yeah, his deck is doing what it was designed to do, at least after sideboard. He has 4 copies of Tireless Tracker in his sideboard. Perfect for this matchup, pretty much to add some additional threats that are hard for the control player to deal with. And yeah, that card seems like it's going to single-handedly win the game for Petersen. Okay, well, no attacks, but yeah, I have. Yeah, this is about a million damage with
and 1,000 other ways of killing
with
you.
all of my Valakuts, and yeah.
So Neil's showing that he had various counter magic, but he couldn't just sit on it.
Spell Snare doesn't counter Tireless Tracker. Negate doesn't counter it. Disdainful Stroke doesn't counter it either. And that is always the problem with control decks. You need to find the right answers for the opponent's strats.
Yeah, I like the move that's happened within the design team when it comes to designing counter spells, of trying to make sure that if it's a cheap counter spell, it's probably not one that can universally deal with everything. You have to be a little bit picky and figure out what the key threats are you want to counter. Yeah,
you also have to make choices in deck building. That, to me, is part of the fun in Magic.
Absolutely it is. So we see Dredge doing what Dredge does here, getting plenty of cards in the graveyard, getting a Creeping Chill early, getting a few threats on the battlefield thanks to Bloodghast and Narcomoeba.
It's almost a repeat of Game 1, it seems like. Turn 1 Shriekhorn, turn 2 Cathartic Reunion, have a couple Dredgers, pass the turn with a lot of power on the battlefield. And now, even if Martin Dang has Rest in Peace, it might be too late.
Yeah, it seems crazy to think that having a turn 2 Rest in Peace might just not be good enough, but occasionally Dredge just gets these draws that fight the hate by just going under it, by being too fast for it to be able to stop it.
Yeah, being on the play is definitely one of the big aspects of this final game. Because if Martin would have a turn 2 Rest in Peace, but Martin had been on the play, yeah, this would have looked completely differently.
The former Pro Tour winner is surveying his hand, trying to figure out a way out of the situation he finds himself in here. I mean, in terms of what's left in the graveyard, it's not the scariest looking graveyard for next turn, but there's nothing to say that just the Faithless looting that's in there that can be flashed back, if it works out that Drow has an extra land, couldn't indeed set something up.
Although there are no Dredgers yet, I guess you never know what comes out of the Shriekhorn. But unless Zhao gets say a Stinkweed Imp or another Dredger into his graveyard before drawing cards, the contents of his graveyard aren't as threatening yet. So just a pass for Martin. That doesn't look great for the Dane.
So in upkeep, Shriekhorn uses its final charge counter to mill for 2, and there is the Stinkweed Imp. This is exactly what Drow was looking for here. And you see the advantage bar move. Narcomoeba's coming along. There is a prized amalgam, so still more power going onto the battlefield here thanks to that Dredge.
Yeah, this is one of the better outcomes for Zhao in his upkeep.
Niels Moller hoping to enact his carefully pieced together plan from his game 2, which is to hope that his teammates win.
Yeah. Well, so far that is successful over here.
A nice little attack for 6. There is the potential for something to jump in the way thanks to Ether Vial.
Well, the 1-drops in the Spirits deck are Noble Hierarch and Mausoleum Wanderer, neither of which are the best blockers.
Path to Exile gets rid of 1 prized amalgam for good. Exile is definitely the place that you want to send that creature if you can help it. But giving lands to this Dredge deck can sometimes work out kind of poorly, because that's where it's able to more reliably do things like flashback Faithless looting.
Yeah, exactly. With Dredge naturally doesn't draw all that many actual cards from its library. What it hopes to do is to draw, or Dredge, a whole bunch of Stinkweed Imps. So that means that sometimes indeed the Dredge deck doesn't actually have access to a lot of lands. Therefore that drawback of Path to Exile is more relevant in this matchup than in many others.
Scalding Tarn picking up another land for Chosa, who's now, if anything, a little flooded in terms of lands in play. I don't think he'll mind too much, though. He's also got a fair amount of threats, and easy to imagine him just milling into a Creeping Chill or 2 and being able to close out this game.
So Life from the Loam getting back a bunch of lands. This doesn't really look like it is going to do much yet, but an important card in the Dredge deck is Conflagrate, which you can cast from the graveyard by discarding X cards, and you get to deal X damage. So stacking up those lands in your hand will work out nicely when you finally find that Conflagrate.
And of course, Life from the Loam helping you find it because it itself has Dredge 3.
Yep.
Important to have some kind of a Dredger in your graveyard before you're untapping and drawing for your turn.
Yeah, and Morten is still not interacting with the graveyard yet. The way for Morten to win this game is to well, first stop what Zhao is doing, for example via a Remorseful Cleric, and then put down some relevant blockers. But Morten is under a whole lot of pressure and doesn't have a lot of time to do both things.
Combat here attacking for 2, 5, 8 damage of a potential 12.
Well, there is a Spell Queller for Morten Dang. Typically you want to cast it to exile some spell on the stack, but with Morten already at 12 life, he just has to protect his life total and start blocking. Blocking Bloodghast is not great, especially since we know that Zhao has a whole lot of lands in his hand to bring it back. But it is the way to prevent the most damage from happening while keeping your Spell Queller alive.
Alright, so this makes things a little better. While still in combat, just flashes in his Spirit there to be able to exile the entire graveyard.
Yep.
So now we are playing, at least briefly, comparatively fair Magic.
Yeah, and it's good that Morten did it in combat, otherwise Zhao could have played a fetch land in his main phase and then responded to the Remorseful Cleric by fetching and getting back his Bloodghast.
So Zhao there played Life from the Loam, even though he had an empty graveyard, simply to get the Dredger into his graveyard.
That is what the deck does, yeah.
He then cast Stinkweed Imp, which a meaningful attacker in this situation, and it also a very problematic card to get in combat with, because it will kill anything that it ends up fighting with.
It wouldn't be the first time that the Stinkweed Imp beatdown gets the job done.
Dredging a couple more Dredgers. Dredge begetting Dredge. And Dark Blast, kind of a nice one, just as a utility removal spell that you have easy access to that also aids the Dredge plan. Big swings coming in here from Chosa, and given that Martin is fetching up his 4th untapped land, that suggests to me that we might be seeing a Collected Company rather soon.
Yeah, and that could do a whole lot of work. For example, providing 2 good blockers, maybe also boosting Spell Queller if you hit a Lord, so that you can actually block the priced Amalgam. But a lot is going to come down to what is in the top 6 of Morten Dang. Well, it looks like there are at least a couple creatures, so he's not missing.
Get some Lords into play and see if you can get any kind of a race on him, Martin.
Oh, he has lots of choices. Droxel Captain and Supreme Phantom for the double Lord angle. Potentially Reflector Mage to... well, you could bounce something like a priced Amalgam.
Yeah, priced Amalgam, noteworthy for being pretty difficult for these Dredge decks to actually cast. Some of them have access to blue mana thanks to lands that tap for a lot of colors, but I'm not sure that that's true of Zhao's list.
Well, he has a Steam Vents in his list and a Gemstone Mine.
So in principle he would be able to cast it, but most of the time paying 3 mana for it, not what you want to be doing.
No. Well, Morten is coming back bit by bit. That company was exactly what he needed. He was able to block, get rid of some threats with the Reflector Mage. He's still alive. 3 life is not a whole lot, especially not against a deck with Creeping Chill and Conflagrate, but yeah, he nicely clawed back into this game. Let me move the advantage bar a bit more to the middle.
A fair amount of work to do, though. Worth noting that once the Spirits deck shifts gears and starts attacking, it does deal a lot of damage very quickly indeed. All of those Lords piling up and meaning that when the swings come, they can be comparatively large. Trow does not want to leave it to chance, though. Let's see what he's got next. Life from the Loam to grab back a couple of lands.
That doesn't really do a whole lot yet.
Drow, though, does get down. Having to just leave that there, but as Spell Queller comes from Martin Dang. Martin Dang drawing for the turn. He's got a Rest in Peace in hand.
Oh, well, that is big. Because that does shut off the obvious ways that Zhao has to win the game from this point in Creeping Chill or Conflagrate. By taking out the possibility for easy dredges. And now Martin is actually suddenly ahead. It didn't look good for him a couple turns ago, but 2 ways of dealing with the graveyard and a bunch of blockers that allowed him to stay alive. Well, actually, Martin might be ahead at this point.
I mean, at this point, if you're Zhao, are you thinking, well, maybe I can just draw a Creeping Chill and cast it? What's its casting cost again? 4?
4.
Well, I mean, you have 4 mana.
And drawing Conflagrate, pay red and then 6 more. Just land Conflagrate might also be lethal. So there's definitely some outs in Zhao's deck.
So
back to nature, dealing with the Rest in Peace. That does turn back the graveyard as an option.
Though currently nothing in there.
Not yet. Well, there's a Faithless Looting.
Right. This lets us get something started. Enough mana to easily be able to flash it back.
Finding another Faithless Looting. So once you get going, you can definitely keep drawing cards. That Prized Amalgam is probably still better in the graveyard than in hand, unless Zhao has a blue source. I think he has a Steam Vents on the battlefield already. But at this point you might be better off spending your mana onto Faithless Looting flashbacks.
So just so you can see there, our scores have updated. This will be the final game of our match. Piotr Gilgovsky able to win 2 games on the bounce with his KCI deck against Hardened Scales. Christopher Larson was the one in the early lead there, but was not able to maintain that lead. And Martin Dang here making an effort to fight back in similar fashion. If he's able to do so, then it will be the Danes that win here. But things very, very close indeed, as in spite of Niels Moller not able to really get much going in his match, a Conflagrate here from Zhao Chosa, enough to get the handshake, and that means, wow, Dredge taking it down against Spirits. Big win there.
Yeah, well, as we talked about, Conflagrate was one of the ways to win, and that Faithless Looting eventually found it. Zhao chose to hardcast it, could have also discarded it, both would have worked, but to me, the key takeaway from this particular set of games is that Remorseful Cleric, while great, doesn't single-handedly win the game yet. It mostly acted as kind of a temporary speed bump, and wasn't as powerful as the Rest in Pieces that are just better against Dredge.
Yeah, it turns out the Dredge Burn plan, a pretty tenacious addition to what's already a scary package. We will see plenty more Magic for you. We've got some Time Warp Magic available after our ad break. Do not go anywhere. More Magic after this.